The quantum anomaly first flickered across Elena Rodriguez's monitors at 3:47 hours GMT. Most junior analysts would have dismissed the microsecond burst as routine electromagnetic noise, but Elena was different. Her fingers, calloused from years of coding and late-night research, danced across the holographic interface with practiced precision. "Director Zhang," she called out, her voice cutting through the low hum of the NSA's quantum communication monitoring station. "We've got something weird." Director Lai Zong approached, his weathered face a map of decades spent navigating the most classified corridors of global intelligence. He'd seen strange things in his career: cyber attacks that vanished like smoke, communication ghosts that defied explanation. But something about Elena's tone made him pause. The anomaly wasn't just strange, it was impossible. Quantum signatures don't just appear from nowhere. They're precise, calculated, a dance of probability and intention. This signature was different. It carried a complex mathematical structure that suggested not just intelligence, but an intelligence so advanced it made human communication look like primitive scratching. "Isolate and analyze," Zhang commanded, his mind already racing through potential scenarios. Cyber attack, experimental satellite, something from the black budget programs that even he didn't know about. But deep down, they both knew this was something else entirely. Miles above Earth, the Zarkak's scout ship descended with calculated indifference. Its crystalline hull, a living technology that was part machine, part organic substrate, reflected the early morning sunlight like a massive, impossible prism. To the few civilians who might catch a glimpse, it would look like an extraordinary meteorological phenomenon, a trick of light and atmosphere. Inside the ship, the Zarkak's command crew viewed their approach with a mixture of scientific curiosity and institutional arrogance. Humanity was another emerging civilization, another potential resource to be cataloged, controlled, or consumed. Their preliminary studies had painted a picture of the species consumed by internal conflict, technological infancy, and self-destructive tendencies. They were catastrophically wrong. What the Zarkaks didn't understand was that humanity's apparent chaos was actually its greatest strength. Those internal conflicts had forged a species of incredible adaptability. Every war, every technological revolution, every cultural clash had been a crucible, tempering human potential into something far more dangerous than the aliens could comprehend. The first transmission came simultaneously with the ship's atmospheric entry, a mathematical declaration of intent, encoded in a language that was part quantum communication, part pure information. To the Zarkaks, it was a standard protocol, a diplomatic engagement that had subjugated hundreds of emerging civilizations before. They believed they were sending a message of inevitable submission. Instead, they were lighting the fuse of humanity's most extraordinary moment. In underground bunkers and high-security command centers across the globe, a network of international defense protocols silently activated. Military commanders from nations that had spent decades as bitter rivals now found themselves in a surreal moment of absolute unity. The quantum communication burst that the Zarkaks believed was an irrefutable demand of surrender was actually their first and most fatal mistake. They had no idea that humanity had been preparing for first contact in ways no civilization could have predicted. Elena Rodriguez looked up at Director Zhang, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Sir," she said, her fingers already racing across the quantum decryption interface, "I think we're about to have a very interesting day." The war room was a symphony of controlled chaos. Major General Sarah Kimura stood at the center, a holographic display rotating between her hands, showing multiple simultaneous data streams from around the globe. To her left, Dr. Raj Mehta from India's Quantum Computing Division was arguing with Colonel Chen from the Chinese Strategic Defense Command. To her right, a team of Silicon Valley engineers worked alongside Russian cybersecurity experts. 63 minutes after the first quantum anomaly, the world had transformed. "We're not looking at a traditional invasion," Kimura announced, her voice cutting through the cacophony of technical discussions. This is a probe, a test. The hologram shifted, displaying the alien ship's quantum signature alongside complex mathematical models. What looked like random interference to an untrained eye was, to these experts, a language of unprecedented complexity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now pulled from her NSA monitoring station, stepped forward. "They're gathering information," she explained, her fingers dancing across a translucent interface. "But not just technological data. They're trying to understand our social structures, our decision-making processes." Colonel Viktor Volkov, representing the Russian Federation's Special Operations Division, let out a dark chuckle. "Then they will be very confused." The beauty of humanity's response was its absolute unpredictability. In any other scenario, the assembled experts would have been competitors, representatives of nations with long-standing tensions. Now, they moved with a synchronicity that would have been impossible just hours earlier. "We need a multi-vector response," Dr. Mehta proposed. His quantum computing model began to map potential communication strategies, each more audacious than the last. "We can use their own communication method against them. Inject deliberate inconsistencies, create quantum noise that looks like signal." Sarah Kimura's eyes narrowed. Psychological warfare at the quantum level. The plan was elegant in its complexity. Every communication network would become a potential weapon. Satellites designed for weather monitoring would become intelligence gatherers. Cellular networks would transform into a global sensor array. The entire planet would become a single adaptive defense system. "They're studying our conflicts," Colonel Chen observed, pulling up historical data of human wars and technological competitions. "What they don't understand is that our internal struggles are our strength. Each conflict has been a crucible of innovation." A young engineer from Google's advanced research team spoke up. "Our AI systems can model their communication patterns in real time. We're not just defending, we're learning." The alien ship continued its descent, completely unaware that every millisecond of its approach was being analyzed, decoded, and transformed into a potential weapon. Major General Kimura activated the Global Communication Protocol, a system developed in absolute secrecy, designed to coordinate military and civilian resources in ways no single nation could achieve alone. With a single command, research facilities became potential weapon platforms. Communication networks transformed into intelligence systems. "They wanted to study humanity," she said, a rare smile crossing her typically stoic face. "Instead, they've awakened something they cannot possibly understand." Outside the war room, across cities and research facilities, military personnel and civilian experts were already implementing the first phase of humanity's response. The invasion would not be met with fear, but with the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed: adaptive, collective intelligence. The Zarkaks had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were coming to categorize humanity. Instead, they had just challenged a species that turned conflict into innovation and uncertainty into opportunity. Dr. Alejandro Rice's fingers moved like a concert pianist, but instead of creating music, he was composing digital warfare. The underground research facility in the Andes Mountains hummed with an intensity that felt almost alive. Banks of quantum computers surrounded him, their cooling systems creating a constant, low-frequency background noise that seemed to pulse with anticipation. "We're not just breaking their code," he muttered to his team. "We're rewriting the entire concept of communication." The Zarkaks believed their quantum communication network was impenetrable. They were wrong. Humanity's first strike would be invisible, a digital phantom that would infiltrate and transform the alien systems from within. Rice had spent his entire career preparing for a moment like this, though he never expected it would actually arrive. His team was a microcosm of human potential. Maria Chen, a former Chinese military cryptographer. Ibrahim al-Rashid, a Saudi Arabian quantum physicist. Katerina Volkov, a Russian neural network specialist. Each brought a lifetime of expertise. Each had been marginalized in their previous roles, and now they were humanity's first line of digital defense. The virus Reyes was developing wasn't just a piece of code. It was a living, adaptive system that could learn, mutate, and exploit the smallest vulnerabilities in the alien communication network. Every line was a weapon, every algorithm a strategic decision. Targeting their communication relays, Chen announced, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. We're not just blocking. We're redirecting. Satellite networks that moments ago were simple communication tools transformed. GPS systems became precision targeting mechanisms. Weather monitoring satellites turned into long-range scanning platforms. The entire technological infrastructure of Earth became a single coordinated weapons system. In orbit, the first real engagement began. The Zarkak scout ship detected the initial infiltration as a microscopic quantum flutter. What seemed like a simple communication anomaly was actually a complete systemic invasion. Reyes's virus didn't just enter their systems, it rewrote their fundamental operational protocols. Navigation systems began to drift. Communication channels became garbled. The ship's quantum computational core started receiving conflicting instructions, each more bizarre than the last. We're not destroying their technology, Reyes explained to the International Command Center watching the operation. We're confusing it, making it question its own existence. The International Space Station, once a symbol of human cooperation, became a forward observation point. Its scientific instruments were repurposed into long-range scanners that could detect the most minute quantum signatures. Astronauts became the first line of a defense nobody had anticipated. Each modification happened in milliseconds. A communication relay meant for scientific research became a jamming system. A mining laser designed to extract resources from asteroids transformed into a potential weapon. Solar panels on research stations were reconfigured to generate electromagnetic pulse capabilities. The Zarkaks discovered that humanity's technological ecosystem was a living, breathing organism. What worked in one moment became useless in the next, as human strategies evolved faster than the aliens could comprehend. They studied us for decades, Reyes said quietly, watching the digital battlefield unfold, but they never understood the most important thing about humanity. His team looked up, waiting. We don't just adapt, he continued, a smile spreading across his face. We transform. Outside, the first alien systems began to collapse, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, systematic deconstruction that was far more terrifying. The Bradbury Research Station on Mars had never been just a scientific outpost. From the moment of its first construction, it was a testament to human potential, a seed of civilization planted in the most unforgiving environment humanity had ever conquered. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood in the central command hub, watching as the station's entire infrastructure transformed. Mining lasers designed to extract resources from Martian rock now pivoted with deadly precision. Communication relays became sophisticated jamming systems. The station's life support mechanisms were reconfigured into energy weapon platforms. We're not just a colony anymore, she spoke into the communication link with Earth. We're a forward operating base. Across the solar system, humanity's scattered outposts were awakening. The moon was no longer just a scientific curiosity or a potential tourist destination. It became the most sophisticated early warning and command center in human history. Massive radio telescopes that once listened to the distant whispers of the universe now tracked the Zarkak's fleet with terrifying accuracy. In the asteroid belt, mining colonies that were once considered economic experiments transformed into heavily armed defensive positions. Asteroids themselves became potential weapons. Their trajectories could be altered, their massive kinetic energy redirected with mathematical precision. The transformation wasn't just technological. It was psychological. Every human settlement beyond Earth understood its role in a way no alien civilization could comprehend. There was no central command forcing this adaptation. It was a collective, organic response. Each outpost, each research station, each mining colony becoming a living part of a larger defensive organism. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, leading the Jupiter research platform, watched as the station's solar collection arrays were reconfigured into massive electromagnetic pulse generators. The platform that was once dedicated to studying the gas giant's complex atmospheric systems was now a potential weapon that could disable entire sections of an alien fleet. "They thought we were scattered," Nakamura muttered, reviewing the rapid modification protocols. "They'd never understood that our distance is our strength." Each human settlement carried the DNA of Earth's most aggressive survival instinct. The research stations weren't just scientific outposts. They were seeds of human civilization, each one capable of becoming a fortress at a moment's notice. The Martian colonies were particularly strategic. With lower gravity and a harsh environment that had already forced humans to develop unprecedented levels of technological innovation, Mars became the primary manufacturing hub for advanced defensive systems. Factories that once produced scientific equipment now churned out components for warships and defensive platforms. Rodriguez watched as the first batch of Mars-developed defensive satellites prepared for launch. They were unlike anything in human or alien military history. Adaptive systems that could change their operational parameters in milliseconds, powered by quantum computing cores that could predict and counter potential threats before they fully materialized. "We're not just defending," she said to her team. "We're redefining the concept of defensive strategy." The solar system was no longer just a collection of planetary bodies and human outposts. It had become a single, coordinated defensive network. Every satellite, every research station, every mining colony was now a potential weapon. The distances that the Zarkax thought would protect them from a unified human response were now the very mechanism of humanity's strength. With Earth as its beating heart, the solar system prepared for a war that would reshape the understanding of technological warfare forever. The Zarkax had no idea what was coming. Dr. Amara Okonkwo leaned back in her chair, a constellation of holographic displays surrounding her. The Psychological Warfare Division wasn't a military unit in any traditional sense. It was a collective of anthropologists, linguists, cultural theorists, and neuroscientists, humanity's most unconventional weapon. "They're mathematically precise," she explained to the assembled team, "which means they're fundamentally predictable." The Zarkax communication network was about to experience something it had never encountered: the chaotic brilliance of human psychological manipulation. Each team member represented a different cultural perspective. Miguel Ramirez, a former Mexican intelligence operative; Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese communication theorist; Ahmed El-Fayed, an Egyptian expert in cultural semiotics; Dmitry Volkov, a Russian linguistic psychologist. They were humanity's invisible warriors, fighting a battle that would be invisible to traditional military sensors. The first assault was subtle. Mathematical anomalies began to appear in Zarkax communication channels, messages that seemed perfectly logical at first glance, but contained deeper layers of cognitive dissonance. Cultural references that made no sense within their rigid communication protocols. Quantum-encoded transmissions that carried multiple conflicting interpretations. "We're not just sending messages," Okonkwo explained. "We're creating cognitive traps." The Zarkax believed they understood psychological warfare. They had subjugated hundreds of civilizations, using mathematical precision to break down social structures. They had elaborate computational models that predicted societal responses with near-perfect accuracy. They had never encountered humanity. Each transmission was a precisely crafted psychological weapon. One message would contain a complex mathematical proof that subtly contradicted the Zarkax's fundamental understanding of computational logic. Another would introduce cultural references so deeply contextual that their translation algorithms would collapse into recursive loops. Miguel Ramirez developed a series of communication protocols that looked like standard diplomatic exchanges, but were actually designed to create maximum cognitive dissonance. Each message was a puzzle, a trap designed to make the Zarkax question their own computational models. "Look at how they process information," he told the team. "They're a collective consciousness that believes in absolute logical consistency. So we'll give them something that's logically consistent and completely impossible." The attacks weren't just digital. They were psychological, cultural, mathematical. Dr. Tanaka's team created communication bursts that mimicked alien transmission patterns but contained subtle human cultural markers. References to art, to emotional experiences, to concepts of individual identity that the Zarkak's collective consciousness couldn't comprehend. "We're not just fighting," Okonkwo said, watching the complex data streams. "We're demonstrating the fundamental difference between their collective and our individual consciousness." The Zarkaks began to experience something unprecedented in their history: doubt, uncertainty, the first cracks in their supposedly impenetrable collective thinking. Communication networks started to fragment. Computational models began to produce unexpected results. The very infrastructure of their technological society began to experience micro-failures that no predictive algorithm could explain. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology. It was its ability to be fundamentally unpredictable. "They studied our conflicts," Ramirez said with a slight smile, "but they never understood that our diversity is our strength." As the psychological warfare continued, the Zarkaks found themselves facing an enemy that didn't just resist invasion, an enemy that could transform the very concept of invasion itself. The battle near Jupiter was never going to be a conventional engagement. Commander Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the U.S. Hawking, his fingers hovering above a holographic interface that looked more like an artist's canvas than a traditional military control system. Around him, the ship's quantum AI systems pulsed with a living intelligence that blurred the line between technology and consciousness. "Incoming wave," Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez called out, her voice steady despite the approaching alien fleet. "Multiple vector approaches." The Zarkaks believed in mathematical precision. They approached warfare like a perfect equation, each movement calculated to minimize risk, maximize efficiency. Their ships moved in geometric patterns that had conquered hundreds of civilizations. They had no idea what was coming. Chen's strategy defied every principle of traditional military engagement. The human fleet didn't just move, it danced. Ships changed configurations mid-battle, communication networks reconfigured themselves in milliseconds, weapon systems transformed with a fluidity that made the alien computational models collapse. "Activate quantum entanglement communication," Chen commanded. The order wasn't just a command. It was a living instruction that spread through the fleet like a neural network. Damaged ships became improvised weapons. A destroyer hit by an alien energy weapon would instantly reconfigure its failing systems, turning its own destruction into a strategic advantage. Communication arrays that were partially destroyed became elaborate decoys, sending out quantum-encrypted signals that confused and misdirected the alien targeting systems. Lieutenant Rodriguez's fingers moved across her interface, and entire sections of the human fleet seemed to breathe and shift. Ships that moments ago were in defensive formation now became an offensive wave, their movements so unpredictable that the Zarkak's computational models began to fragment. "They're trying to understand our pattern," Chen muttered. "But we don't have a pattern." The battle wasn't just happening in physical space. It was a complex dance of quantum communication, adaptive AI systems, and human creativity. Each human ship carried not just weapons, but a core of adaptive intelligence that could make strategic decisions faster than any centralized command could process. Weapons that were designed for one purpose transformed mid-battle. A communications array would become a targeting system. A damaged propulsion unit would redirect its energy into a defensive shield. The entire human fleet moved like a living organism, each ship connected through quantum networks that allowed for instantaneous strategic adaptation. The Zarkak's fleet began to break apart, not through overwhelming firepower, but through something far more terrifying: complete systemic confusion. Alien ships found their targeting systems redirected, their communication networks invaded by quantum-encrypted signals that carried multiple conflicting instructions. What looked like a simple communication burst was actually a complex psychological warfare tool that made the alien ships question their own operational parameters. "We're not just fighting," Chen said quietly, watching the battle unfold, we're rewriting the entire concept of warfare. Jupiter's massive gravitational field became part of the battle strategy. Ships used the gas giant's complex magnetic interactions to redirect energy weapons, to create sensor ghosts, to perform maneuvers that would be impossible in traditional space combat. As the battle concluded, the Jupiter engagement became more than just a military victory. It was a statement, a demonstration that humanity's strength wasn't in technological superiority, but in its ability to transform, to adapt, to turn even defeat into an opportunity. The Zarkak's computational models collapsed, unable to process a form of warfare that didn't follow any recognizable pattern. Humanity had just redefined the concept of battle itself. The pursuit began not with a declaration of war, but with a calculated silence. Admiral Elena Rodriguez studied the holographic star charts from the command deck of the RSS Prometheus, humanity's most advanced deep space vessel. Her team wasn't just tracking the retreating Zarkak's fleet. They were hunting them with a predatory precision that defied conventional military strategy. "They think we'll stop," Captain David Chen remarked, his fingers dancing across a quantum communication interface. "They don't understand that we're not defending anymore. We're pursuing." Humanity's warships moved like digital phantoms through the star systems. Each vessel carried more than weapons. They carried the accumulated martial knowledge of Earth's complex military history, adapted to interstellar warfare with a terrifying efficiency. The first Zarkak's colony world they encountered never saw them coming. Quantum communication networks were infiltrated before the first weapon was fired. The colonists' defensive systems began to receive conflicting instructions, their computational cores overwhelmed by layers of information that seemed perfectly logical and completely impossible. "We're not just destroying," Rodriguez explained to her command team. "We're dismantling their entire conceptual understanding of warfare." Each human ship was an ecosystem of adaptive intelligence. Weapon systems could transform in milliseconds. Communication arrays became jamming mechanisms. Damaged components were instantly rerouted, repurposed, transformed into strategic advantages. The Zarkaks had conquered hundreds of civilizations by following a simple principle: overwhelming force, mathematical precision, absolute control. Humanity introduced chaos. On the third targeted system, the human fleet didn't fire a single traditional weapon. Instead, they hijacked the entire planetary communication network. Infrastructure systems began to fail. Energy grids collapsed. Transportation networks became impossible labyrinths of misinformation. Captain Chen watched as an entire Zarkak's administrative center found itself caught in a cascading system failure that seemed to defy all logical explanation. "We're teaching them a lesson," he muttered. "Warfare isn't just about destruction. It's about transformation." The pursuit became a psychological operation as much as a military campaign. Human ships would appear and disappear, leaving behind communication bursts that were part military intelligence, part philosophical challenge. Each transmission was a puzzle, a threat, a demonstration of capabilities that the Zarkak's computational models couldn't comprehend. Rodriguez understood something fundamental that the Zarkaks never would. True power wasn't about control. It was about adaptation. In the Sigma Draconis system, they encountered the first serious resistance. A massive Zarkak's defensive platform that had repelled countless invasions suddenly found its own systems turned against it. Defensive weapons redirected their fire. Communication networks became labyrinths of misinformation. The platform didn't just fall. It was systematically dismantled, its own technology used as a weapon against itself. "They studied us for decades," Rodriguez said, watching the engagement unfold, "but they never understood the most important thing about humanity." Her tactical officer looked up, waiting. "We don't just fight," she continued, a rare smile crossing her face. "We evolve." The pursuit wasn't just a military campaign. It was a statement. Humanity was no longer a civilization to be studied or conquered. They were a force that could transform the very concept of interstellar conflict. The Zarkak's fleet continued to retreat, but retreat was becoming a relative term. With each engagement, they lost more than ships and territory. They were losing their fundamental understanding of what warfare could mean. The Zarkak's High Council convened in their most sacred chamber, a massive crystalline structure that had witnessed the subjugation of countless civilizations. But today, something was fundamentally different. Krellax, the senior member of the collective consciousness, projected holographic representations of the conflict. Each image was a testament to their systematic defeat. Planetary systems compromised. Communication networks dismantled. Entire defensive infrastructures turned into elaborate traps. "We have been fundamentally misunderstood," Krellax announced, their collective voice a harmonized blend of mathematical precision and growing uncertainty. The human victory was unlike any invasion the Zarkaks had ever encountered. It wasn't about territorial conquest or resource extraction. It was a complete reimagining of civilizational interaction. Diplomatic envoys from emerging species watched the proceedings with a mixture of terror and fascination. Humanity had not just defeated the Zarkaks, they had transformed the entire concept of interstellar conflict. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now leading the human diplomatic mission, understood the delicate balance of this moment. This wasn't about punishment. It was about demonstrating a new paradigm of galactic interaction. "We're not conquerors," she told the assembled galactic representatives. "We're demonstrators of potential." The restructuring of the Zarkaks collective became the most studied diplomatic event in galactic history. Instead of dismantling their civilization, humanity introduced something far more dangerous: the concept of individual potential within a collective framework. Quantum communication networks were rebuilt, but this time they incorporated human-developed adaptive algorithms that introduced controlled chaos, individual decision-making capabilities, and complex recursive learning patterns. The Zarkaks discovered that their previous model of collective consciousness was fundamentally limited. Humanity showed them that true collective strength came not from uniformity, but from diverse, adaptive individual potentials. Research outposts across multiple star systems began to document the transformation. The Zarkaks were learning something unprecedented. Failure was not a weakness, but an opportunity for fundamental redesign. "We have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding," Krellax announced to their entire civilization. "Diversity is not a threat. It is the primary mechanism of survival." Emerging civilizations began to study the human approach. It wasn't a military strategy. It was a philosophical revolution. Diplomatic missions became cultural exchange programs. Military technologies were transformed into communication and exploration tools. The very infrastructure of interstellar interaction was being rewritten. Dr. Rodriguez understood the deeper significance. This wasn't just about defeating an alien civilization. It was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about intelligent life. "Adaptation is not just a survival mechanism," she told her team. "It's the highest form of intelligence." The galactic community watched in amazement. Humanity had entered the interstellar stage not as conquerors, but as transformative agents. Every interaction became an opportunity for mutual growth, for reimagining potential. In research facilities, diplomatic chambers, and quantum communication networks across multiple star systems, a new understanding was emerging. The Zarkaks had wanted to categorize humanity. Instead, humanity had redefined the entire concept of civilizational interaction. As the final diplomatic protocols were established, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had not just survived an invasion. They had transformed the very concept of what intelligent life could mean. The stars themselves seemed to pause and recalibrate.